Hey guys, welcome to Serial Killing 101 Episode 2, where today we'll be talking about the infamous serial killer, the Brooklyn vampire, Albert Fish. On this video today, we're going to be talking about 5 things you may not have known about Albert Fish. Most people know that he's just a complete sicko, that he ate people, he was a cannibalistic person, massive sadist. But there's some things that were really interesting about Albert Fish that most people don't really know about. So I figured we'll go over that in this video today. So stay tuned. Okay, the first thing that most people don't know about Albert Fish is that for the first 12 years of his life, he was actually in an orphanage. During the time when he was in this orphanage would have been the early 1900s. He first learned about his first sexual acts. He learned about becoming aroused for the first time. And this happened through seeing other boys being spanked by the people in charge of the orphanage. Apparently there was a lot of abuse that was going on there. And Albert Fish claims that the first time that he ever got aroused was actually watching one of the boys being spanked, the first time he masturbated. So this in turn led him to the rest of his future as an infamous serial killer that practiced these types of things throughout his career. Number 2, most people don't know that Albert Fish actually raised 6 children. From what the children claim is they had somewhat of a normal upbringing. Their father was a house painter, and he chose that career simply because it was easy to get away and move from town to town, be undetected. This is a lot of the reason why Albert Fish was able to stay so infamous for so long. But in his home life, with his wife and his 6 children, they didn't really say that they saw any of these things. Now, they did claim that later on in life, as Albert Fish got older, he would start to get more serious with his self-harm, and the kids started to see that then. At the time of them being raised, they didn't realize their father was a serial killer. So that goes along with, again, the 2 types of personalities that most serial killers have. They have the normal, regular, everyday life where nobody would believe that they're that kind of person, but they're master manipulators and they can just switch and they do their serial killing and so forth like that, and nobody really knows. This leads me to the third thing that most people don't know about Albert Fish is most people know about his self-harm and how he would practice abuse of himself and also his victims. Most people know about the pins in the groin. That was something that he did later on in life, about when he was in his 40s and 50s. That's when it kind of started to get a little bit more serious with his self-harm. Now, something else people don't really know is that Albert Fish was a religious killer. He did this basically because he was a strong believer in the Bible, and he took Catholicism seriously when it came to my body is my body, my blood is my blood during communion. So when he would kill his victims, he actually would practice vampirism as well. He would drink the blood of his victims. He would also eat the flesh of his victims. This to him was a way to become closer to God, be more of a godly man, to sacrifice, which we'll talk in a second about some other things that have to do with that. But the thing about Albert Fish is, as he got older, he became more and more violent with himself and with his victims. At one point, Albert Fish moved beyond the groin pinning type of thing and would do things more serious to himself, like put alcohol-soaked cotton balls in his rectum and light them on fire. This is something that he took great pleasure in, apparently. He also started to do nailed paddles instead of using the 9 tails lashings on himself and his victims. He started to put like nails through that and do that to himself. You could see this type of behavior. What movie was that? I think it was Angels and Demons, the Dan Brown movie that Tom Hanks did. You see one of the guys in there that's actually whipping himself as well. That was a common practice back in the early religious days of the Bible. People would harm themselves to be closer to Christ, and for their sins as well. So this is something that Albert Fish took very seriously, and it was something that he practiced throughout his entire life. Okay, so the number 4 thing that most people don't know about Albert Fish is he did take the self-harm to himself and his victims even further. When he started to be more cannibalistic, again, for the for flesh, wanting to be closer to God, wanting to sacrifice, he started talking about how he would whip the boys and how that sexual arousement from his childhood, again, led into his adulthood. But he had stated multiple times that when he would whip the children, he was actually doing that as well as being a religious thing, as a way to tenderize the meat in his victims. His favorite piece of a human body to eat was the buttocks. He claimed multiple times that he liked to roast the buttocks for multiple hours in the stove, and then he'd like to make a stew out of it with carrots, potatoes, onions, all the different spices and that sort of thing. So Albert Fish, again, a real sicko, but he tried to do it in a classy way, which is kind of weird. Again, people say about Albert Fish that he was kind of like a gentleman. He was that grandfather that nobody ever had. So he was kind of like an elegant man as well. So it seemed to stem over into his serial killing and the way that he would eat his victims. There was also a time period where in the early 1920s, he expressed that that was a time in New York where kids could go outside. Parents didn't have to worry about anything happening to their children. They would play stickball in the streets. And he expressed at one point that he did abduct, I think it was a 12-year-old little black boy. And he claimed he did this because at the time, most people wouldn't worry about their kids, like I said, but even most people wouldn't worry about the black children in the neighborhood. Okay, I know that seems a little racist, but that's kind of how he expressed it from that time period, that kids were really not looked after much. They could kind of come and go as they please. Parents didn't worry. So at one point he did abduct a little black boy and basically sodomized him and raped him for weeks. He kept him chained up in a location that nobody really knows. For about 6 weeks, he would have sex with him, abuse him, and apparently his plan was to kill the little boy, but at one point he had a change of heart and let the little boy go. About 10 years later, there was another point in time where he abducted another boy, a 16-year-old boy where he had sexual relationships with him for months. This was something that was more deeper than he had with the other boys that he had captured in the past. This was more sexually fueled and more self-harm fueled. There was points in time where he would ask the boy to hurt him. He would in turn hurt him back, and then they would have sex. And this happened for a long time, a few months. The sickest part about this story is when Albert Fish was done with this boy, he didn't really let him go. He cut off his dick, threw a $10 bill on the bed next to him, and he skipped town. Again, this is something where he was easily able to move because of him being a house painter with his family. He would just get up and move different states, different areas, and that's kind of how he got away with stuff for so long. The worst part about this is that it's showing a point in time with Albert Fish that he's getting more aggressive. He's getting more unsafe. He's really not starting to care what he's doing anymore. He's not really trying to cover up his tracks. I don't know if this is something that most serial killers go through, where once they're infamous for so long, they just really want to give up. They really don't, I don't know if they necessarily want to keep doing it, but they definitely don't care about getting caught. So this is the number 4 thing for Albert Fish. The number 5 thing, and probably the most notable thing in Albert Fish's life, is when he killed Grace Budd. Grace Budd was a little girl that kind of solidified Albert Fish in the history of being a serial killer. First, the way this story starts is Albert Fish was going through the local newspaper, which he normally did, and was seeing ads to meet up with boys, pretty much. He was intrigued by a post from Grace's brother, an 18-year-old boy. So when he finally made an appointment to meet with him, he met with Grace's brother and realized that this guy is bigger than him. It would be hard for him to overpower him. So he decided not to gain a relationship with this guy, whether it be to murder him or to have sexual relations. So then he saw his little sister, Grace. He became completely infatuated with Grace. This was, again, one of those time periods where Albert Fish was really, really heavy into his religious killing and religious sacrificing. And he took Grace as a virgin, someone to sacrifice for the Lord. And that's exactly what he did. Again, he was a master manipulator. He manipulated Grace's parents during that time that he came to see the brother, in enough short span of a time for him to take her apparently to a party that was an address that was never known. He spit out an address to the parents, and it didn't actually exist. What he did was he took Grace Budd to a house in the woods that he had predeterminedly picked out, and he basically had her wait outside until he could get everything ready inside, called her in, and brutally murdered her. He did not have sex with Grace. He didn't have any kind of sexual relations with her. This was, again, to keep her pure in the eyes of the Lord. He then decided to drink her blood and consume her body over a course of 9 days. He ate her entire body, and the worst part about this is he didn't care. The parents knew that Albert Fish had abducted this girl. They didn't necessarily maybe know his name, but they knew the man who had abducted her. This in turn got Albert Fish caught. This is actually the first and only conviction that Albert Fish ever faced in his lifetime. So it's hard to tell how many people he actually killed and molested and sexually had his way with throughout his life. It's estimated that Albert Fish has sexually molested or abused close to 100 people in his life, and he's killed or murdered as many as 15 to 30 people. So this goes to show that Albert Fish was one of the most sickest, defiling serial killers in the history of serial killing. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode and learning maybe a little bit more about Albert Fish that you might not have known, a little bit more about his family life and the reasons why he did the things he did. So I want to say thank you for tuning into episode 2 of Serial Killing 101.